if you scattered houses all over the place, and then you try to ship electricity to those houses, you can't do that with DC electricity. It doesn't go down the wire. If everybody has their own refrigerator, you can't power that with renewable energy. But by tying all these systems together, so there's our high voltage solar rack. The well is actually right up off the upper right-hand corner of the page, down the hill a bit. You can't see the hill very well in this picture, but it's a couple of 100 feet down. Area. It's a barn where we cut firewood, we store seeds. Now, one thing that happened, these satellite pictures are always a little bit dated. There's actually a big shop building right back here behind the main buildings that was built after this picture was taken. And that's where we have all of our woodworking, metalworking equipment. So the water that comes up from that well comes to the main building. We have a need in our climate to cool buildings off in the summertime. They can get quite hot and quite humid. Air conditioning is one of the biggest uses of energy, particularly in the summertime in hot, humid climates in the United States. What we're setting up is where the water from this well comes up only a couple 100 feet. It comes through the house, so it can. We run it through a pipe rack in the house, so it can absorb heat. And then the fields where that irrigation water is growing, this is where our seed crops are. This is where we earn our living, right here in these fields. You notice it's only a couple of 100 feet. There's another field off to the right. There's actually another field back down that way, all of them within several 100 feet of our main community structures. We basically get free air conditioning. We can pump the solar water up that's being used for irrigation, chills the house, goes out to the field. At the same time, we can be grinding grain. The grain was grown in these fields, so we can transport it by hand to this building where it can be ground, cooked with solar cookers. These things in the back are solar cookers. You saw, could barely see some of those in the last picture, actually behind the main kitchen building. But in any case, so that one high voltage rack has wires that go to that building and that building and that building and a shop building back there. The amazing thing about all this DC electrical equipment is that it works really well with a system that's all tied together like this. With AC systems, if you overload them, the motors melt, the system shuts down. Conventional off-grid systems that use DC power don't work. They don't work. AC motors have to have perfect voltage. DC motors tolerate crazy voltage swings, and they're all fine. So the system we put together is ideally suited for a village level cooperative setup. And that's what renewable energy works well with. And you know, I've had this discussion with a lot of people, and in this age where we like to think of ourselves as being tolerant of just tolerant in general, you know, we're working to overcome sexism and racism and to tolerate people with different sexual preferences, and that's all fine and good, but people want to sort of transpose that back onto the laws of physics and renewable energy. I get this line over and over again, well, there's a lot of different ways to do this. And, you know, I don't want to be too presumptuous or sound too arrogant, but no, actually, there's not a lot of different ways to do this. There are ways that renewable energy will work. There are ways that it does not work. I will challenge anybody to find a system that works more efficiently than what we have here. There are 3/4 of humanity. 3/4 of humanity, that's a lot of people, are living on less than $5 a day. If we have any hope of providing those people around the world who are living on less than $5 a day with renewable energy, we have to get past this addictive approach to energy that we've been taking. What we've been trying to do at Living Energy Farm, and I think we're going in the right direction at least, is building a system that can support people who don't have a tremendous amount of money and resources. Interestingly, a lot of the work we've done, of course, is to keep ourselves warm in the winter. And when you go to more tropical climates, more equatorial climates, you don't have to do that. So in some ways, this gets a whole lot simpler in warmer climates. And in fact, I think that's where we're going next. We've been trying to export our model to around the United States, but we have what I call the fried chicken problem, that you can provide healthy homegrown food and healthy homegrown vegetables, and that's the healthiest diet a person can eat. And if what they want is fried chicken and pizza, they're not interested in the homegrown food. Well, the same is true with energy. What we have at Living Energy Farm, I can take a hot shower 24/7. I can surf the net. I can drink, like I said, cold lemonade, cold beer. My house stays warm in the wintertime, and it does it automatically. Those blowers just run. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to shovel firewood. It stays cool in the summer. Solar-powered air conditioning that runs for free, basically, just for the cost of laying in the pipe in the house, which is pretty cheap. But when I go try to offer this to other Americans, they say, well, where's my big screen TV? It's like, well, you can't have a big screen TV. Well, can I run my tumble dryer at midnight? No, you can't. You should put your clothes on a clothesline. So basically, we're trading off addiction and privilege for the next generation. We're cannibalizing the next generation in order to hold on to our addictions and our privilege in the current context. And of course, the corporations that are making money off of this, they're the ones who are helping support that, helping support our addictions. I want to talk for a few minutes about how our understanding of energy got so messed up, because it's deeply embedded in the physical sciences and in the social sciences, just a really upside down view of energy. I highly recommend a book published back in the 1970s, I believe, by Richard Wilkinson, called Poverty and Progress. Fantastic book. He was a British economist. He's elderly by now. I don't know if he's still alive. I communicated with him many years ago. In any case, what this book outlines is a history of the development of technology, of technological change, and energy and food, all of these issues, but specifically how the technologies themselves changed. What we think, the myth that we have created, because we want to think of ourselves as being smart, we want to think of ourselves as being the products of tremendous decades and centuries of progress. This thing of progress, of course, there's racial component to that progress too. White people like to think of themselves as being the pinnacle of this brilliant industrial progress that has transformed the world. The reality is that technological change has always historically been a response to depletion. Another interesting author you can look at, Mark Nathan Cohen, has looked at the history of human health. The peak of human health globally was about 30,000 years ago. Hunter-gatherers, before the rise of civilization, were pretty happy and pretty healthy. But what happened is they started running out of, you can only support a limited density of a limited population on a given area of land. So they started farming, and of course, the growth of empires. What's fascinating about this picture I have on my screen now, that device that you see on the left is the first known steam engine. Now you might think, wow, steam engine, that must date to the early Industrial Revolution. Well, no, it doesn't actually. It dates to about AD 63. We're talking Roman Empire. They built steam engines, and they didn't need them. They didn't use them because it didn't fit within their economy. The one on the right is the first, some drawings from some of the original steam engines that actually started to be used in the 1600s in Europe. What happened with steam power in particular, as populations became more and more dense, civilizations grew bigger and empires fought with each other, firewood is much, much more accessible than is coal. Europe, in particular, became deforested by the 1600s. They ran out of firewood, so they started burning coal to keep their homes warm. They ran out of coal at the surface. They started digging coal out of pits, open pits. Those pits started getting deeper. They became mines. The mines started to flood. They brought in rag and chain pumps, so they'd have several horses walking in a circle, driving this chain mechanism with these rags being pulled up a pipe by a chain up through a pipe, going down into this well to suck the water out of the well so they could keep digging coal. Well, the wells got deeper and deeper and deeper, and these rag and chain pumps weren't working anymore. Steam engines were invented in Roman times. They were invented over and over and over again. And it was in the mid-1600s in Europe, when those rag and chain pumps failed, that somebody finally said, hey, that's steam stuff. Let's see if we can make that work. And they started building steam-powered devices at the top, at the wellhead, to pump water out of the mines, because they'd used up all the firewood. They used up all the coal they could find on the beaches. They'd used up all the coal they could find on top of the ground. They used up all the shallow coal, and they were digging coal that was too deep in the ground to get it out of the ground by any other means. And that's the reason that transition to coal began. And the standards of living that we think of industrialism as improving our standard of living, that took another 300 years. The lowest points for standard of living for human groups anywhere were in the early Industrial Revolution. The first labor laws in England were to protect children under 12 years old from not working more than 84 hours a week. These people were starving and struggling, and they turned to machines to try to save them from that. So technology has always been in a race with depletion. If you look at how we clothe ourselves, one of the big points that Richard Wilkinson makes is that with each one of these steps, the more and more sophisticated technology, the complexity, the overhead, if you want to call it that, gets bigger and bigger. So, hunter-gatherers clothe themselves with animal furs and animal skins. Now, of course, in the modern context, animal furs are a whole different issue. But for hunter-gatherers, that's what made sense. They could produce high-quality garments without a tremendous amount of work. That worked fantastically well. As populations grew more dense, they started harvesting wool from sheep. The technology got a little bit more complex. The amount of labor that you had to put into it got even more, it became more labor intensive, more machinery intensive. Populations grew even more. They started to switch from wool to cotton and flax. With each one of these steps, the quality of the material, the quality of the lifestyle goes down, the quality of the material produced goes down, the amount of labor goes up, the technological overhead goes up. It's a response to depletion. This is the dark side of technology, the side that we don't want to think about. Now, this internet technology that we're using now, people all over the world, perhaps, are watching me, that we think of that, wow, that transformed the world. But when you think about what's happened was that industrial production, because we have depleted the easily available natural resources. If you work in the construction trade, we can't even make plywood anymore because we've cut down all the old trees, what we call veneer grade trees, and now they're making it all out of chipboard. It's a more complex process. Computers themselves are a response to the complexity of industrial production. Technology does not simply march forward. It marches forward, or it responds to depletion historically. These days, it responds to profit. You remember that comment I made about refrigerators getting less efficient? Well, that's profit. Nowadays, what we define as food is based on what can be put in a box, refined, and stored shelf stable, and sold profitably. Those, unfortunately, are mostly healthy, unhealthy, addictive foods. So technology moves forward in a lot of complicated ways. When we do the webinar talking about batteries, we're going to talk a lot about profit, because the batteries we use at Living Energy Farm are nickel iron batteries, and they're fantastic batteries. They're the best batteries ever made, as far as I can tell, but they're not profitable. Some of the best machines are not profitable. We've run into this as well, working at Living Energy Farm with farm-grown fuel. We're trying to figure out what we can grow on the farm to power a small engine to run the farm, because right now we're actually still using some gasoline, not a bunch, because economically we still have to support ourselves. What we're realizing is that the old engines, pre-World War II engines in particular, were in a lot of ways better engines. They were heavier, they had more metal in them, and they turned more slowly. The RPM in the engines were around 1,000, 1,200 RPMs. And what the people making these engines realized was that they could make them spin faster, so they could get more horsepower with less material. So they can make an engine, with a third as much metal and still make the profit, but that engine would spin 3 times as fast and therefore wear out 3 times as fast. So profit is having a big influence on technological development. Depletion is having a big influence on technological development, and has been the guiding force of technological change historically. And now politics, our desire to feel morally okay as wealthy consumers in the wealthy world, is having a huge impact on our understanding of technology. None of these factors trump the laws of physics. The laws of physics are what they are. So designing energy systems that work well, none of our self-imposed silliness can change any of that. I show this slide when I'm talking about energy to people in the United States, because when the Europeans came to the United States, they conquered the Native Americans. In fact, that's what we fought our Revolutionary War for. The British wanted to maintain the treaties with the Native Americans, and the colonists didn't. That was really the primary reason we fought a Revolutionary War, for those of you who know American history. But in any case, the Europeans conquered this whole continent and thought of it as a continent that was wide open to use, to exploitation. What people don't realize was that the same factors of depletion-driven technological change. They were delayed a couple of centuries in the New World, so-called, in North America, but the same process came into play. What you're looking at is a picture from the 1800s. This is an old black and white photo of a steam-powered log hauler. And you look at, it's a freight engine pulling logs on, and you can see it's piles of logs going back right off the back of the picture. The reality is that Europe was deforested in the mid-1600s, and that's when they shifted to coal. In the United States, coal, firewood was used to melt iron. It was used to power the steam engines. It's being used to power this steam engine all the way up through the 1800s. And by the mid-1800s, the entire continent was deforested, except for the most remote swamps and mountaintops. And that's when the price of coal began. The price of firewood just kept going up and up and up. And particularly after the Civil War, there was a big transition towards coal because we used up all the firewood. So even when you conquer a continent, you're still facing the realities of the ecological limits of the planet we live on. Unfortunately, our politics have become grossly disconnected from these ecological limits. What's happening now is that I was involved in a campaign to bring returnable bottles back to Virginia in the United States. The way we were defeated was by the bottling industry realizing that they couldn't defeat us head on. They had to use a roundabout tactic. And the bottling industry is the people who make plastic bottles. And the way they did it was by promoting plastics recycling. Plastics recycling is a net environmental loss. Plastic is so light and so fluffy that when you've got a diesel truck, a big truck full of plastic bottles, you have a truck full of air. There's nothing in the truck but a tiny little bit of plastic, and that plastic is now a mixed product. There's all these different kinds of plastic. There's more environmental destruction done from trying to recycle plastic than from simply throwing it in the trash. But the bottling industry needed to purge the moral weight of their product, and they did that with recycling. And it was successful. The environmental groups jumped on board. So now all of these environmentalists are recycling their plastic. It's doing more harm than good. What's happened with plant products in the United States, this is a log processing operation in the state of Virginia, in the United States. Now remember, I just told you, Europe ran out of trees in the 1600s. The United States burned up all its trees by the mid-1800s. But the power companies in the United States, our local power company, is getting tax credit. They're getting public subsidy to take these pine trees. These are pine trees you're looking at. Grind them up and burn them to make steam, to make electricity. Completely, absolutely idiotic if you know anything about the history of energy. But our politicians don't, and the desire for palliative solutions has so overtaken our policy-making processes and our just basic common sense that we're making a lot of stupid decisions. I see a lot of people now, they get, the fast food places are packaging their food in little paper containers, and people are getting their food in the grocery store in paper bags. Somehow we've got this idea that if it comes from an organic source, that somehow that makes it more benign. In fact, it makes it less benign or equally as destructive. It's clear cuts on a massive scale that support these chipping operations. This is a chipping operation you see here. So they bring in these huge piles of trees. That big crane pulls them off the log trucks, throws them in this big circular pile, and then there's a massive grinder. It throws the trees into that grinder, and then those chips can then be used to be burned, to make fuel. They're used to glue. They're glued back together to make the modern version of plywood. It's called chipboard or OSB, oriented strand board. So this is a homogenization of trees into chips that can be used for anything. David Pimentel, a few other scientists have done work to try to figure out if you take the entire photosynthetic product of the United States, in other words, every leaf on every tree in the United States, every soybean, every kernel of corn, every kernel of wheat, and everything, in other words, everything that grows in a single year in the United States, if you could somehow collect all of that and burn it in a single year, the energy output would be 25% less than the amount of energy that we're actually using for that year. And we wouldn't have any food to eat at all. The amount of energy that we're using is grossly out of scale with what can be provided by renewable sources. Again, the real solutions are not all that difficult if we're reforming ourselves in communities. By the way, our political process is also spiraling out of control in the United States, funded by wealthy corporations that are selling us all these products. If we become more economically self-sufficient, we will become more empowered, and that is the real root of democracy. Carl Wittfogel, a Marxist that dates back 100 years, pointed out that the early riverbank civilizations that grew up, Indus River, Yellow River, Tigris and Euphrates, were highly despotic because there was a ruling class that had control over the waterworks. Democracy and economic centralization are fundamentally incompatible. So to save our democracy, to preserve or help democracy grow on a global scale is absolutely dependent on economic localization and economic self-sufficiency at a local level. Well, not coincidentally, our ecological situation, centralized energy, that's a historical artifact based on steam boilers, based on this whole centralized industrial process we built up. There are not a lot of different ways to do it. It is not a feel-good process. The laws of physics are what they are. Renewable energy works on a village level. It does not work on a major centralized industrial level. We don't really have a choice. When you look 300 years out into the future, our children and our children's children are going to be living in self-sufficient villages. The only question is whether or not what happens between now and then. We could gracefully scale down. We could build a sustainable economy within the existing one. We could build a democratic society within the existing one. We can live within the existing supply of renewable energy on a per capita level. I'm telling you, my house is toasty warm, and it's within the per capita supply of renewable energy. It was built at a fairly modest cost. We can do this, but it involves a fundamental restructuring of our lifestyles. And that, of course, is the hard part. And that's what people don't want to hear. I've given the speech many times, and I'll keep giving the speech as long as I'm breathing. We don't really have any choice. The laws of physics are going to do to us what they will, whether we like it or not. And just this is a picture of a party I went to many years ago in a community. These people are having a lot of fun, obviously. Just at a very basic level, we are social beings. This isolation that we've imposed on ourselves in recent years is artificial. It's not fulfilling. And the corporations have created a lot of products to try to sell us things that fulfill us instead of real social connections. All of our human needs are more effectively met in cooperative organizations, in communities. But the reality of the modern world is that privileged, wealthy, powerful people live in isolated households. They live in any city that they choose, and all over the world, lower income people, farmers, traditional peoples live in villages. So to say that villages are a solution to our economic problems, are a solution to our ecological problems, are a solution to our political problems, it is antithetical to the entire system of privilege, our own internal system of privilege. What I've noticed in trying to take the living energy farm model, the living energy model around the world, is that so many people, they're so well intentioned about wanting to help people who have less than they do, but these ingrained privilege is just ingrained. We assume that we're smarter, and that these poor brown people around the world, well, they're not as wealthy as we are because they're not as smart as we are. It's just an assumption. It's like, wait a minute, is that really true? All of our solutions lie in restructuring our society and our economy around self-sufficient, economically self-sufficient, ecologically sustainable, democratically supporting of democracy, whatever the phrase is there, at a community level. And for me, there's also a spiritual level to this. I was raised a Christian. I reject that Christianity which puts the deity up in the heavens. And in fact, the original Christianity, if you know anything about the Roman period, that original Christianity was in fact a popular movement It was later taken over by the Romans. The Bible was written 300 years after the original Christian movement. The original Christian movement was a popular movement, and it was based in locally self-sufficient communities. I will call myself a pre-biblical Christian if I want to call myself a Christian. Mostly, I just believe that the living world around us is fundamentally sacred. The trees are sacred, the animals are sacred, the soil is sacred. We do not have the right to destroy that. We do not have the right to take that away from our children. We do not have the right, even if you simply assume that there's no divine intervention. It took 3 billion years, that's billion with a B, to get from a single cell organism to a multi-cell organism. Even if you simply assume that the world we're living in now was not created by with any kind of divine intervention, it took billions of years to create it. So when we destroy a species now, and we are in the 6th great extinction, we are destroying species now as if an asteroid hit the planet, except that asteroid has a human face on it. Do we have the right to destroy 4 billion years of evolution? Do we have that right? If we have that right, does it make any sense? And why are we doing it? It's not human nature. It's a set of choices that we are making here and now, and we are fully empowered to make a different set of choices. We simply have to admit to ourselves that we're making those choices. We have to admit that we are addicted and invested in things as they are, and think about the sober ways to break those addictions in ways that don't ignore the laws of physics, that don't sacrifice the laws of physics, and don't sacrifice science to politics. Certainly in the United States now, we have a political leadership that could care less about science. But as a popular movement, we are not obligated to follow that kind of stupidity. We can do better than that. We will do more webinars. I have laid out an outline. I don't know if that outline has been published, but in any case, we're going to do webinars on our high voltage DC electrical systems, our DC microgrid, as we call it, how we use DC electricity at Living Energy Farm. We're going to do webinars on our batteries, because good batteries matter if you're trying to be locally energy self-sufficient. We're going to do webinars on food production. We're going to do webinars on how to grow food on trees. We're going to have lots of fun. There we go. Arif, are you guys still there?
Hey, yes. I have a bunch of questions from the audience. And by the way, this the presentation in PDF form will be downloadable when we post the webinar replay on our website. So look for that. You'll get the whole presentation from Alex. And we'll also post the schedule as he was describing it. So if you guys didn't get that, or if you have any doubts or questions, you'll get all that in written form in black and white. And we have some questions from the audience. So Alex, are you ready for questions? Are you? All right. So let me start with this is from Susanna. And she asks, do you think it's possible to take a typical existing home and hyper insulate it enough to be as energy efficient as a new straw bale or net zero type home design?
Well, there are two questions there, and the answer to one of those questions is yes, and the answer to the other question is no. The building, I don't know if you can see my webcam, but this wall right behind me, this is actually a straw bale house, and it was the first straw bale house you saw in the presentation there. That house is actually an existing house with a straw bale shell wrapped around it. So part of the back of the house was new construction. This wall behind me is new construction, but the front part of the house, all I did was I call it dummy footing, but it's a non-load bearing footing because you can't put straw right on the ground, certainly not in this climate. So you get your straw up a little bit, and then you just lean straw bales against the wall. That's really cheap, easy. You bring your friends out. If you got drinkers, buy them beer. If you don't got drinkers, buy them soda pop. And say, here's a trowel, smear up the stucco. They stack the straw up and smear the stucco. It's really easy. The thing that gets you is the windows. Good windows are expensive, and those are an industrial product. hard to make on your own. So the answer to the first question is, can you take an ordinary home and at a reasonable cost, insulate it really well? The answer is mostly yes. The insulation is pretty easy. The windows are a bit more expensive. The second part of the question, though, of making it really efficient in the bigger picture, no, because private homes, if you got one family living in this house, even if it's fairly cheap to insulate it, it's still a single family house in the wrong context. And I know that's hard for people to hear, because everybody, millions and millions of people who are out there in the world, have their own private homes and they don't want to give them up. But that's the laws of physics. I'm sorry. That model of breaking us up into our own private little houses is a historical anomaly. You can make the house a lot more efficient, but the context is still wrong. You're still driving to work. You still don't have a local economy that house is part of. So the house itself, this particular house, a bunch of people live in it. So it's a cooperative house. And then there's actually 140 fruit trees around it. There's a beautiful garden. And the people in the house are at least capable of, whether or not they choose to.
Thank you very much for this presentation. Again, we'll meet next